Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars and you're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned your subscription. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is part 8 of my V-shaped guitar build. And specifically what I'll be covering is I'm going to start to prepare the blanks that I'm going to use to make the guitar, the body, the neck, and the fretboard. So yeah, we're finally at the stage where I'm going to start cutting some wood. And that's what everybody seems to be waiting for anxiously. So without further ado, let's jump in and get started. I've selected several different species of wood for this guitar. For the body, I'm using alder. For the neck, I'll be using maple. And for the fretboard, I'm actually using a wood composite known as Richlite, and I'll talk more about that later. The first thing I have to do is I've got to measure and mark the dimensions for the body blank. And in this case, the body blank is going to have an overall width of 18 inches, a length of 22 inches, and then it's going to be planed down to 1 3/4 inches. Now, to do this, the most economical way to do it is to take a board that's wide enough to where I can cut it into 2 pieces and then glue those together. So it's a 2-piece blank. Now, sometimes I can source blanks that are wide enough, especially with alder, but for the most part, it's just easier and more affordable to purchase a 9-inch wide blank or board that's 10 feet in length. And then that way I can cut out just the pieces that I need and glue those together. I purchase all my lumber from a local supplier and it comes only partially processed. It's cut to length, to width, and it's rough sawn to its final thickness. There's not a lot of planing or joining or anything that's done like that to the wood. Now, I could have them do that for me because the lumberyard where I purchased the wood from offers that as a service. But I have all the equipment to do it myself, so I figure I'll just save the money and do the final processing in my shop. I chose alder for this build because I'm going to paint the guitar. Alder doesn't have a really beautiful grain, although sometimes you can find some attractive grain if you really shop for it. But for the most part, I don't really have to worry about the grain or knots or even little cracks and things like that, because when I prep the guitar for paint, all that will be taken care of. Now, if I was going to be making the body out of mahogany or maybe swamp ash, then I would be more concerned about the appearance of the grain and the existence of knots. So I would try to source a piece of wood that doesn't have those flaws in them. Now with alder, because I'm selecting this a fairly knotty piece of wood with some cracks in it, I'm able to save a substantial amount of money. So the blanks end up costing far less than if I was to use a high-grade premium selection of wood. I have a table saw that I could use to cut the blanks down to size. However, the blank is 10 feet long, and that makes it a little bit of a challenge to get on my little table saw. So I'll just measure and mark the cut lines, and then I'll use a hand circular saw to cut those down to size. High precision really isn't necessary here. I just need to make sure that the finished blank is going to be big enough to accommodate the files that I created in my 3D programs for generating the tool paths and all that kind of thing. So I just need to make sure that I'm as close to that 18-inch width and 22-inch length and 1 3/4 inch thickness as possible. Thickness is a little bit more important. I definitely want this guitar to be as close to exactly 1 3/4 inches as possible. If I didn't get that just right, then there might be problems later on when I set up the guitar. But the length and the width is not as critical. The next blank I need to prepare is the neck blank. And here I'm using a slab of lumber that is about 4.5 inches wide, and I'll cut it down to a length of 30 inches. The thickness as it stands right now is just about 2 inches. And what I'll do later on is I'll plane it down to a final thickness of 1.65 inches. Now, when I prepared the files for CNC, the blank was set up to be 5 inches wide. However, I went out to my shop and the only blanks I had were 4.5 inches wide. But that's okay in this situation because the neck will fit entirely within that 4.5 inch blank width. And what I have to do is just be conscientious about how I position the blank on the machine and where I locate the home position for the CNC machine. And I can just tell the machine that the blank is 5 inches wide, even though it's only 4.5 inches. But that's not going to matter because it's going to cut the neck roughly out of the center of that blank. So its actual width isn't really that critical. Next up, I need to plane the wood to its final thickness. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the thickness of the blanks is critical because I'm going to be doing two-sided carving. And if I don't have the thickness planed exactly right, each side is not going to be in its correct location relative to its thickness. So when I start to assemble a guitar, the bridge might end up being too high, or the pickup pocket's not deep enough, or the neck pocket not deep enough, or the control cavity won't be deep enough. So I have to make sure that I plane the blanks to exactly the thickness they need to be. And in the case of the body, which is what I'm planing right here, it's going to need to be 1 3/4 inches thick, or 1.75 inches. So I'll start planing the boards down to that thickness. And of course, I'm not going to try to do it all in one pass because that can tear up the wood. So I do gradual passes, just slightly lowering the blade about a 1/64 of an inch with each pass. And folks have always asked me when they see me running wood through the planer, what do I do to avoid planer snipe? And what planer snipe is as the board is running through the planer, as it comes out the other end, that other end can drop down ever so slightly, causing the end that's still in the planer under the blades to kick up slightly, and that'll put a small cup across the surface of the blank. So what I do to avoid that is very simple. As the board is coming out of the planer, I grab the end of it and just pull up ever so slightly, and that seems to prevent that cupping from happening, that planer snipe. Now this planer is a 13-inch wide planer, and which is wide enough for almost everything I do. Yeah, it'd be great to have a 16 to 20-inch wide planer, but when you look at the prices of those, it goes up dramatically. And this is one of the reasons why I make my body blanks in two pieces, because this planer has a width of 13 inches. So I can easily run a 9-inch wide board through it. And then I can glue those two boards together to have my 18-inch wide blank. Now this planer uses straight cutting blades. There are no helical cutters in this planer. When I bought this planer, there were very few of those helical planers on the market, and they were super expensive. And even to this day, they're still fairly expensive. And this works so well, I just haven't seen the need to upgrade to a helical planer. For the neck blank, I'm going to plane it down to a final thickness of 1.65 inches. Now, it's important to understand these numbers that I'm throwing out, they're not default numbers that you have to adhere to. You can make the body and the neck thickness whatever you want to make it, just as long as the design is going to work and you can actually pull it off. But I've chosen these just because it worked with the design that I'm creating. So I'll plane both sides of the neck to get them perfectly flat, and then I'll bring that thickness down to 1.65 inches. And as I'm planing, I'll stop periodically and I'll check the thickness with digital calipers to see how close I'm getting, because I really want to nail that thickness as precisely as possible. The last piece of wood I have to prepare is the fretboard. And I have to admit, I was a little bit concerned about this because I've never worked with Richlite before. Richlite is a composite wood. It's made from wood materials that are bonded together under high pressure. And the result is an extremely hard material that is an outstanding substitute for woods like Gabon ebony, which are becoming very difficult to source, very expensive, and the quality is dropping. So when I ran this through the planer, I was afraid my $20-some piece of wood was going to be destroyed, but I got to admit, it planes better than regular wood does. I was amazed at how smooth the surface was after running it through the planer. Now, like a lot of garage-based workshops, I have limited space. So what I did was I created these flip-top tool stands. And if you're interested in making your own, I offer plans on my eGuitar Plans website, as well as my YouTube merch store down in the description below this video. But with this bench, I can put the planer on one side and the joiner on the other side. And then when I need to use it, I just flip the top and get everything set up. The only boards I'm going to run over the joiner blades are the two halves for the body blank, since they're going to be glued together. I don't have to worry about the neck blank or the fretboard blank. There'd be no point in joining those edges. But what I have to do first, once I get my joiner set up, is I have to decide which edges are going to be glued together. And I typically look at the end grain so that the end grain is mirroring each other on each side of the glue seam. Then I'll place the top faces together like you see me doing here. And then I'll run that glue edge over the joiner blades at the same time. And the reason that I do it this way is because if my fence or the table was off by, say, half a degree from 90 degrees, that error is canceled out because I'm doing the two body halves at the same time with those faces together. So that flaw would be canceled. And when I bring the two halves together to glue them, the two halves will be absolutely flat to one another. Now, in truth, I don't use a joiner very much in my workshop. This is the only operation that I actually use a joiner for, and that's to square up those edges that are going to be glued together for the body blanks. For that reason, I didn't want to invest in a big 8-inch floor model type joiner because they're really expensive, they're very large, and I just wouldn't use it all that much. So instead I purchased a smaller 6-inch benchtop joiner, and I think I purchased this several years ago from Grizzly Tools, and this joiner works great. The only thing is I have to make multiple passes with skim cuts. If I try to take too much wood off at once, it will bog down the joiner. But 4 or 5 passes and the work is done. The edges are perfectly square with the tops, and I'm ready to start gluing things together. Several years ago, I purchased a set of these 4-way panel clamps, and I have found them to be, without a doubt, the best way to glue the body halves together to make the blank. And they apply clamping pressure from the sides so that you're squeezing the two boards together, but they also provide clamping pressure along the top so that you keep the two halves flat to one another. When I do this sort of gluing, I try not to use too much wood glue. I've watched other guys slather on glue, and they'll apply it to both halves. And what they're doing is they're just wasting glue, because a lot of it's going to end up squeezing out when you apply clamping pressure. So I just try to apply just enough to cover the surface of one of the blank's gluing edges. Then I can bring the two together and start the clamping process. Now you'll notice as you watch me do this, it is a little bit fussy to get everything set up just right, but I'm telling you, it's worth the effort, because every single blank that I've ever made with this clamping jig has come out perfectly flat with no glue, no visible glue seams. It's just incredible. Now, if you want to purchase clamps like this, just be aware they come disassembled. You'll have to supply the wood to do it. And what I did was I just cut down some scrap 2x4s on my table saw, and that's what I use to make those cross member portions of the clamp. So you will have to put it together, but I think you'll be really pleased with how this works. Now, once I have the clamps adjusted and tightened, it'll only take about an hour for the wood glue to set up. With most of your aliphatic resin wood glues like Titebond, once it's placed under clamping pressure, the wood glue will set up in about an hour, and then you can remove the clamps and nothing is going to change. It's not going to move. Now, I know a lot of guys will clamp for 24 to 48 hours. You can do that if you want. It's certainly not going to hurt anything. But after that first hour, it's just wasted time. So, just be aware that if you want to continue working, you can remove the clamps after about an hour. Although I would recommend letting the blank sit for an additional 12 to 24 hours after removing it from the clamps, if you clamped for about an hour. That way the glue will have a chance to fully cure. Okay guys, well that's all the time I've got for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to advance further into the process of making the parts. And I'm going to start by making the fretboard. And I'll be using my CNC machine to do that. And I think you'll find this episode to be really interesting because I'm using a new type of product. Well, it's not really new. It's been around for a while, but it's the first time I've ever used it, and that is Richlite. Richlite is a composite wood substitute, which is a good replacement for some of the exotic woods that we like to use when making fretboards, because some of these woods are getting really difficult to source and expensive. So I thought I'd give Richlite a try, and we'll see how that works as a fretboard. And I think you'll be impressed by the results. So until the next episode, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, again, welcome. I hope that I've earned your subscription. And if you'd like to show the channel support, you can always visit my merch shelf down below, or you can visit my eGuitar Plans website and purchase a variety of plans for building guitars, for making the tools for guitars. You can even buy some t-shirts as well. And that'll help support this channel and keep me making these videos so that you can learn some of the techniques and tricks that are often kept secret by luthiers. So until the next episode, as always, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for episode 9.